Welcome back to English Listening World. I'm Les Paris, and this is the 12th and final episode in our series, Akihiro's Listening Journey. Throughout our previous episodes, Akihiro has discovered 11 powerful techniques for improving English listening comprehension, from finding rhythm patterns to recognizing sound changes. Today, he'll discover perhaps the most important insight of all: how to integrate the techniques and shift between different listening modes. For many English learners, the challenge isn't just understanding individual sentences, but maintaining comprehension throughout extended conversations, presentations, and meetings. Today, Akihiro will discover how balancing intensive and extensive listening can transform his English comprehension from good to exceptional. Let's join him as he makes this final important discovery. Chapter 12. From Intensive to Extensive Listening. 15 weeks into his English listening journey, Akihiro stood by the window of the Global Tech Conference room, watching as his international clients filed in for the all-day workshop. As the newly promoted Associate Project Lead, he would be responsible for facilitating much of today's session. A full 8 hours of technical discussions, strategic planning, and relationship building. Ready for the big day? Mr. Wilson appeared beside him, coffee in hand. I believe so. Akihiro felt a mixture of confidence and apprehension. His collection of 11 listening techniques had transformed his ability to understand English in various contexts, but he had never needed to maintain that level of concentration for an entire day. The workshop began with introductions from the international team, representatives from the US, Britain, Australia, and Singapore, each with distinct accents and speaking styles. Akihiro applied his techniques seamlessly, mentally processing the disappearing H sounds in the American's speech, the T to D transformations in the Australian's casual remarks, and the unique rhythm patterns of the Singaporean team member. The first 90 minutes went smoothly as Akihiro presented the security implementation overview and fielded technical questions. He felt proud of how far he'd come, understanding complex questions and responding appropriately without the confusion that had once plagued him. But as the morning session extended into its third hour, Akihiro noticed a growing fatigue. The mental effort of applying his techniques to every sentence was taking its toll. His focus began to waver. And what are your thoughts on integrating this with the CRM system? The question came after a lengthy explanation that Akihiro had only partially processed. A brief moment of panic flashed through him. He had lost track of the conversation while mentally translating a phrase the Australian had used moments before. The room fell silent, waiting for his response. Could you clarify which aspect of the integration you're most concerned about? The client elaborated, and Akihiro was able to provide a sufficient answer, but the moment had shaken his confidence. If he couldn't maintain this level of intensive listening for 3 hours, how would he manage an entire day? During the lunch break, Akihiro found a quiet corner, feeling mentally exhausted. Tanaka-san approached, plate in hand, and sat beside him. I noticed you struggling a bit before the break. Listening fatigue? I'm applying all my techniques, but it's exhausting to analyze every single sentence for hours. By the time I process one comment, the conversation has moved on. You've mastered intensive listening, but now you need to learn extensive listening. Extensive listening? Yes, there are two modes of listening in language acquisition. Intensive listening is what you've been practicing, analyzing individual words, sounds, and structures in detail. It's precise but demanding. Extensive listening is different. It's about grasping the overall meaning and flow without processing every word. Like skimming versus deep reading. Exactly. In Japanese education, we emphasize intensive listening for accuracy, but fluent English speakers constantly shift between modes. Extensive for general conversation, intensive for important details. She drew a simple diagram on a napkin. The secret is knowing when to shift between them. Use extensive listening as your default to grasp the general flow and conserve mental energy. Then switch to intensive listening only when you encounter something challenging or when precise details matter. Akihiro reflected on his morning experience. He had been in intensive mode the entire time, mentally applying his techniques to every single utterance, whether critical or casual. No wonder he was exhausted. How do you know when to switch? With practice, it becomes intuitive, but start by consciously shifting based on context. For technical details and numbers, use intensive listening. For general discussion and relationship building, use extensive. Listen for keywords rather than every word. As they returned for the afternoon session, Akihiro decided to experiment with this approach. As the American client described their company's general background, Akihiro deliberately stayed in extensive mode, focusing on main ideas and key terms, rather than analyzing every sound change and grammatical structure. When the discussion shifted to specific security requirements, he consciously shifted to intensive mode, applying his techniques to catch precise details. When the conversation moved to casual team-building topics, he shifted back to extensive, allowing himself to grasp the overall sentiment without mental translation. The difference was remarkable. Instead of constant mental fatigue, he found a sustainable rhythm. Sometimes he missed minor details in extensive mode, but he grasped the essential meaning and context. For critical information, intensive mode ensured he caught the specifics. By mid-afternoon, he had developed mental markers for when to switch modes. The final client presentation began at 4 p.m. A 2-hour session covering implementation timelines, resource allocation, and future partnership opportunities. In previous weeks, such an extended English session would have left Akihiro mentally drained. But applying his new dual mode approach, he followed the entire presentation with clarity and endurance. When a client made an oblique reference to concerns about timeline flexibility, Akihiro caught not just the words but the underlying meaning, something he would have missed if focused solely on decoding individual sounds and phrases. I appreciate your subtle point about timing flexibility. While we've established firm deadlines, we've built buffer periods into the schedule precisely for the contingencies you're concerned about. That's exactly what I was getting at. You understood the subtext perfectly. As the workshop concluded, Mr. Wilson pulled Akihiro aside. That was exceptional work today, especially how you picked up on the client's unspoken concerns. They specifically mentioned your attentive listening. Thank you. I've been developing various listening techniques. About that, we have several new international team members joining next month. Would you be willing to share your techniques with them? Perhaps a short presentation on your approach to English listening. The following week, Akihiro found himself standing before a group of colleagues from various language backgrounds: Japanese, Chinese, Spanish, and Arabic speakers, all facing similar challenges with English listening. Over the past several months, I've discovered 12 techniques for understanding natural English speech. He outlined each technique briefly, from rhythm recognition to chunking, from shadowing to identifying SVO patterns, from focusing on verb tenses to recognizing sound changes. But perhaps the most important discovery came last, learning when to use these techniques intensively and when to listen extensively for gist and context. Intensive listening is like using a microscope. You see incredible detail, but in a very narrow field. Extensive listening is like stepping back to see the entire landscape. Both perspectives are necessary. His colleagues asked questions and shared their own challenges, many nodding in recognition as he described familiar struggles. The beauty of this approach is that it continues to develop. Each conversation becomes a learning opportunity rather than a test of comprehension. That evening, the company held a celebration for recent promotions and project successes. When Mr. Wilson announced Akihiro's promotion to senior associate with expanded international responsibilities, the applause felt like the culmination of a remarkable journey. Later, as his colleagues mingled over refreshments, Tanaka-san approached with a smile. "Congratulations on your promotion. Your presentation today was excellent, clear, insightful, and helpful. Your English communication has transformed completely. I couldn't have done it without your mentorship. The techniques were always within your reach. You just needed to discover them systematically." That night, Akihiro updated his notebook one final time. Technique number 12. Shift between intensive and extensive listening. Intensive listening. Analyze individual words, sounds, and grammar in detail. High accuracy but mentally demanding. Apply specific techniques to decode challenging speech. Use for technical details, important information, unfamiliar content. Extensive listening. Focus on keywords, main ideas, and overall meaning. Lower word-for-word accuracy, but more sustainable. Conserves mental energy for extended conversations. Use for general discussion, relationship building, familiar contexts. Develop mental markers for when to switch between modes. Practice conscious shifting until it becomes intuitive. Remember that understanding context and meaning is ultimately more important than catching every word. He also added a final reflection. These 12 techniques form a system, not just isolated tactics. The journey doesn't end here. There will always be new contexts, accents, and expressions to learn. But with these foundational techniques, I now have the confidence to approach any English conversation not as an insurmountable challenge, but as an opportunity to connect and communicate. Akihiro closed his notebook with a sense of completion. The English language that had once seemed like an impenetrable wall of sound had become a bridge to new opportunities, relationships, and understanding. The journey had transformed not just his listening abilities, but his entire approach to communication, and in doing so, had transformed his future. And that's how Akihiro discovered his 12th and final listening technique, shifting between intensive and extensive listening modes. To practice this technique yourself, try these simple steps. 1. Use extensive listening as your default mode for general comprehension and to prevent fatigue. 2. Switch to intensive listening when you encounter challenging segments or need precise details. 3. Develop mental markers for when to shift modes based on context and importance. 4. Practice consciously shifting until it becomes intuitive. 5. Remember that understanding meaning and context is more important than catching every word. 6. Integrate all previous techniques as tools to deploy when intensive listening is needed. This final technique brings together everything Akihiro has learned and represents the culmination of his listening journey. Like Akihiro, you now have a comprehensive toolkit for understanding natural English in all its varieties and contexts. Thank you for joining us for Akihiro's listening journey. We hope these 12 episodes have provided you with practical techniques to improve your own English listening comprehension. Remember that language learning is a journey, not a destination, and each conversation is an opportunity to grow and connect. From me at English Listening World, I wish you success on your own listening journey.